This isn't just about engines, it's about obsession, legacy, and heartbreak. For decades, the V12 wasn't just an engine to Ferrari, it was the soul of the brand, a roaring symbol of power, prestige, and racing dominance. From the racetrack to the Riviera, these 12-cylinder beasts defined Ferrari's golden age. But somewhere along the road, it all came crashing down. So what killed Ferrari's V12 dream? Was it pressure from the industry, changing times, or something deeper? Something Ferrari never wanted to admit. This is the story of how Ferrari's love affair with the V12 began and why it had to end. Now, why was Ferrari obsessed with V12 engines? Ferrari's obsession with V12 engines goes all the way back to the 1940s. Enzo Ferrari launched the Ferrari brand in 1939. However, the first car they released was the 125S in 1947. And even the very first car, coming from Ferrari, was equipped with a V12. The engine was made by a former Alfa Romeo engineer, Gioacchino Colombo. They chose this engine because it was perfect to represent Ferrari in the automobile industry. The V12s were super smooth and they revved insanely high. Ferrari could easily understand that this engine would give the brand an edge over all competition, especially in racing. With these brutal machines, Ferrari was able to win multiple racing events by the 1950s, and the V12 beasts that led them to victory were becoming the face of Ferrari among the community. This Colombo engine was not anything to mess around with. The beast was screaming at 8,000 plus RPM, taking the world by storm. And the story of these engines was just beginning. Since the engine was already making some noise, Ferrari was now looking to enter the F1. In the 1950s, Ferrari entered the conversation with the supercharged Colombo engine. However, the brand quickly shifted towards a 2.6-liter naturally aspirated V12 as the brand was moving towards a more reliable and consistent performance. Now the brand was beginning to rise, and the world was left to witness the greatness of these V12 monsters. By the late 1950s, Ferrari was dominating F1 and endurance racing. The V12-powered cars were absolutely unstoppable, and soon the world would accept it. However, by the 1960s, Formula One had changed the rules of the game. Engine displacement was capped at just 1.5 liters. It was survival of the fastest. And Ferrari, ever the gladiator, adapted with V6 engines to stay in the race. But deep in Maranello, the roar of the V12 never truly died. It was more than just an engine, it was a legacy. And no matter how much the rulebook changed, those 12 cylinders kept whispering to Ferrari, calling it back. Ferrari just couldn't quit its first love. Even as Formula One rules forced the V12 into exile, the passion for 12-cylinder power refused to die. So Ferrari did what legends do. It took that fire to the streets. In the 1960s, the V12 broke free from the confines of the track and thundered onto public roads. The result? Icons like the Ferrari 250, 275, and 365 series. Machines that didn't just carry the V12 legacy, they amplified it. These weren't just cars, they were rolling symphonies of speed, and the world couldn't get enough. But what was it that set these engines apart from the average engines of the time? In the 1940s, Alfa Romeo was using supercharged engines, bringing hell with them to every race. These engines were insanely strong and were making an incredible amount of power. Other companies were also using either V6 or V8 engines. These engines were heavy and less balanced compared to the technologies used in Ferrari's V12 engines. When Enzo Ferrari brought in Gioacchino Colombo, he told him to design a compact, lightweight engine capable of competing at the highest level and sounding like nothing else. It would be an understatement to say that Colombo understood the assignment. The engine blocks for these beasts were designed with lightweight aluminum alloy. Triple Weber carburetors were used. They required individual calibration and enhanced throttle response and airflow. The engines were designed to be compact and narrow at the same time to fit perfectly in race cars, and the 60-degree configuration is what made it possible. Ferrari had big plans for these engines, and the engines were designed in such a way that scaling up these beasts would be possible. The 60-degree configuration made these engines perfect for the high-revving future these beasts were in for. This system avoided any primary or secondary vibrations in the engines, which made them ideal for revving high with low mechanical fatigue in the machine. The scalability of these engines put Ferrari in a position of power, as it was able to apply this magnificent technology to multiple cars. These powerhouses brought immense glory to the Ferrari name. There was obviously the legendary 125S, which showed the industry what was coming, but that was only the start. The Ferrari MM160 was quick to join the party. It won the Le Mans 24 Hours in 1949, marking Ferrari's first international victory in both manufacturing and racing. More and more cars came in, marking new achievements for Ferrari until the regulations were changed. But how could Ferrari so easily let go of the engines they were known for? Maybe it was Ferrari's luck or some internal conspiracy. But by 1966, F1 had changed regulations again. And now the 3.0-liter regulation had made Ferrari's V6 engines useless in racing. What did Ferrari do? They brought out their beasts once again. Ferrari adapted the V12 engines to the 3.0-liter configuration and readied them for racing. The monsters were not the best in the market, yet as the V8 engines the competition was using were much lighter. But Ferrari was still not willing to let go of their beloved beasts. The brand took the circumstances into account and came up with the flat 12 engines. These engines were still equipped with 12 cylinders. Instead of a 60-degree configuration, they had a flat shape. This modification took the V out of the V12 engines. However, they provided a lower center of gravity to the car, which made the 12-cylinder engines competitive once again. However, in the 80s, Ferrari once again had to put away the V12 engines as the majority of the industry was using V6 or V8 turbocharged engines. And to stay competitive, Ferrari had to comply with the trends. Not for very long, though. By the end of the decade, FIA placed a ban on turbos, and Ferrari was quick to bring out their V12 juggernauts out of the vaults once again. By 1994, Ferrari's Tipo 043 V12 was screaming at 13,500 RPM and generating 830 horsepower. These engines were still powerful, but there were some issues that Ferrari could no longer ignore, even though they had rose-colored glasses on. The V12 engines were now gulping down fuel like it was no one's business. The beasts were super heavy, and cooling them properly was becoming very hard due to the packaging. The complex system of these engines was becoming less and less reliable for Ferrari, and in 1995, Ferrari finally decided to retire these bad boys for good. The last Ferrari car that raced with a V12 engine in F1 was Tipo 044/1, and with that, V12s left Ferrari's F1 team for good. However, these were not the only reasons behind the retirement of the V12 engines. The engines had become extremely dangerous. The monstrous RPMs these engines were generating exceeded the average RPM of most competitors. At these high levels, the internals of the engine were reaching temperatures that were a trouble to optimize. This extreme heating of the engines began making engine blowouts quite common for Ferrari. Another huge problem was the handling of these vehicles. At such high speeds, the drivers would struggle to stay in control of the cars. There were many reports of snap oversteers, poor traction, and trail braking. The heaviness of this vehicle was a significant issue as well. High-speed spins were becoming more and more common, and being combined with brake or tire failure had become a recipe for accidents. Even though the fans loved the glorious roars of the V12s and originally named them the Screamers until the title was given to the V10s, Ferrari realized F1 had to be about winning, not just keeping the V12s alive. The F10s were the new face of F1, and Ferrari had to make the inevitable switch. These new engines were easier to cool due to fewer valves and friction within the engine. The V10s were lighter and shorter, which made the vehicles more efficient and aerodynamic. They consumed way less fuel, and the saddest part was that their roars were considered even better than those of V12s. Ferrari left behind its brand image, legacy, high-revving, monstrous capabilities, and the raw beauty of the V12 engines. But it wasn't completely over these engines. Ferrari was so connected with these engines that even though they took them out of the F1, a new domain was waiting to be dominated by these wild beasts. V12 engines were now the primary focus of Ferrari for road cars. Around the retirement of the V12s from the F1, Ferrari was working on the Ferrari 550 Maranello. This car brought back the front-engine V12 layout to Ferrari. The car had better handling and balance, and simultaneously, it provided the classical Ferrari experience that people craved. The 550 Maranello became the Ferrari car people could use every day, and it quickly started gaining popularity. This car marked the beginning of a new era for Ferrari. It was followed by many legendary V12-powered vehicles, like the even more powerful Ferrari 575M Maranello, the F12 Berlinetta, which had advanced aero and more extreme performance. Enthusiasts have often wondered what would have been the case if these engines had stayed in the F1. Well, the engines could still have reigned over the F1. The innovations would be focused on making the engines lighter while revving higher than the V10s. These engines could still have been expected to generate 900-plus horsepower, so it wasn't entirely impossible. The cooling systems would have to be made more aerodynamic and efficient to keep these monsters stable. And above all that, the majestic roar of the V12 would have stayed in F1. However, this could never have been the reality, as by the 90s, V10 engines were simply better than their ancestors. F1 regulations were becoming tighter, and these engines would have to go sooner or later. But Ferrari's love for these beautiful beasts never died. In 2024, they once again made an excellent vehicle powered by their first love. The 12 Cilindri is the living proof of Ferrari's determination to innovation, performance, and the V12 engines. These engines will forever be a part of Ferrari's legacy and the history of cars in F1 and on the road. The V12 engines and Ferrari's obsession with them were nothing but ordinary. The story of these two was dramatic and incredible. For more stories like these, subscribe to our channel. Let us know your thoughts on these beasts in the comments below. See you soon!